Hello, everyone, and welcome to Documentation Not Included, a tech industry podcast presented by D&I Stream, the live knowledge repository for software professionals. It is Thursday, 7 p.m. GMT. I am freezing. We're live on twitch.tv/D&I Stream. I am Josey Howarth, and I am contractually obligated now to read this script. And as always, I am joined by the most awesomest, bestest, brilliantest, beardiest, coolest, musicianist, guinea pig lovingest, perfectionistic co-host, Chris Seabach.
I don't know what you mean about contracts. And you added extra stuff there. I didn't ask you to read all of that. So thank you very much, Josey. It's wonderful to have you back, as always. As those regular listeners will know, Josey came back last week, so we're very, very pleased to have her back. And thank you very much, and thank you to everybody in chat. There's already a little bit going on in there. If you do have any questions, queries, or anything like that during the show, please do get involved. Ask them. Might pop them up. We might read them out. We probably will read them out. We usually read most people, as long as they're not being nasty or horrible to us. And even then, sometimes we might do it. You never know.
The way I say it is, if you're going to troll intelligently. I've seen it all before, use proper grammar, the whole kit and caboodle. Anyway, before we get going, as always, it's time for our icebreaker. And I've got a really simple one for you, Chris. You have to pick one of these three things that will be the source of your entertainment for the rest of your life. Is it a book or books in general, movies, or TV shows?
I'm going to rule movies out. Because I used to love movies. I've got a wall full of DVDs and Blu-rays downstairs, and obviously we've all got Netflix these days and that kind of thing. It doesn't do much for me. So people in chat are already saying, Volstrat says books, Thrashok says books. So it was, what were the other two? Books,
movies, or TV shows?
TV shows.
Yeah, for me it's books.
Am I on my own for eternity, or is it just my normal life, like with my wife and everything?
It's just your normal life with your wife. It's just you have to pick one.
TV shows then.
You guys like that trash TV, don't you?
No, it's not that actually. It's more dramas and comedies, and like we're watching this. It's not a swear because it's the name of the show, but it's Schitt's Creek at the moment, which is a Netflix Canadian thing, and I'm really enjoying it. Right, like the characters. I like long drawn out TV shows like Breaking Bad, dramas, that kind of thing, because I can get really invested in the characters, and I like seeing them develop over the course of things. Books, I like long movies to me. And I struggle to have time. I've lost interest in the book I'm reading at the moment, and I do it all the time. And that's the problem with it. I love reading, but I also lose interest in it very easily because I don't have the attention span, I think. I only read at night when I'm going to go to sleep, and it sends me to sleep. So it's going to have to be TV shows. Yeah,
for me, it's different for me because it's books. I mean, books are one of the number one sources of entertainment for me. I read on average about 500 books a year. I read really fast. I have an incredible ability to absorb the information that I've read. I consider myself very, very, very lucky. I'm kind of sad right now because I feel like I've read almost every book possible already on like Kindle Unlimited. So I'm sitting there struggling for books right now. But I don't see words when I read.
Yeah, you said this before. I've got a friend who's similar. He skim reads books. Like I went on holiday with him, and he read within the course of a week. He read 4 books, and I struggled to read like a quarter of one. And we read at the same time, and he was just flying through them like this. And I'm like, "Are you even enjoying that?"
I get a kick out of the in the Kindle, because I do Kindle on my phone because it just makes it so much easier. But it always puts up the average time it would take you to read a book. And it can guess based on pretty much your reading experience. So it's using the statistics and the metrics of what you have. And, when my husband looks at it, it's something like 16 hours. When I look at it, it's like 3. I don't know what it is, and I don't know where it came from, but I just have this ability to read through really quickly. And it's interesting because when I start reading books that are not fiction based, or are more like educational based things like, Penguin books or something else like that, I get a chalkboard in my brain.
All right.
So when I'm reading about anything, like if I'm reading about Pearl or something like that, there's a chalkboard in my brain, and there's a stick figure teacher writing on the chalkboard when I start seeing examples and things like that. It's really weird, but yeah. For me, anytime, books.
I want to say books. I want to say books because I know that books are, you can imagine more, you put more things in place. I've enjoyed books and then hated movies. I've also and TV shows, and then also done the other way around as well. I've also watched a TV show or a movie and then read the book and been like, I actually prefer the movie, and it doesn't really matter which way round they come. I can look at them individually. Sometimes they're both great in their own way, but I don't. I wish I could say books, but I just don't have the attention span for them. That's my problem. Maybe the imagination. I don't know what it is exactly.
I think it depends entirely on what you're capable of doing. For some people, when they watch something, it's the ability to shut off. So I think that's what happens with me is my brain literally shuts off, and I have, for lack of a better term, a 3D projection going on. Which I will tell you, if you're an author and you want someone to read your books and, proofread them for inconsistencies, I'm really good at that. There is nothing worse than me reading something and a book bag showing up out of nowhere. I'm like, this was never mentioned before. What? Wait, you said that the car was green. Why is it now red? What's wrong with you? No, that's not the correct clue. That clue didn't exist 4 chapters. Like,
great skill to have.
Great at that. But yes, so that's our fantastic icebreaker question.
And everyone in chat basically said books. So I'm the odd one out here. So I'm the outlier. I'm the yeah. Anyway, so on to today's show. We have entitled it Takes Scrum to Know Scrum. That was kind of thrown into our private Discord chat very quickly because both Josey and I are very busy at the moment. We don't even talk to each other during the week at the moment. we just have very brief one-word conversations, and we ended up putting the show together. So sorry if it's a bit haphazard.
It was more than one word, one sentence. But
so yes, it takes Scrum to know Scrum. There's actually a double meaning for that because I found fairly recently, I'd say in the last few years, that you need to know Scrum in order to be able to practice it properly. And coming from another background, such as Waterfall or another kind of process, it's different and it's more abstract, and there's a more abstract way of thinking about it, and it's focusing on a completely different thing other than... Well, we'll get into the details of it later on, but it's focusing on something very, very different, and it's hard for some people to switch their brains into that mode, and it takes practice to become good at it, and that's the key thing. So we've done this again because last episode, a couple of weeks ago, I mentioned Scrum about 1 million times, and Josey said, right, let's...
Okay, let me just point out that not only has he mentioned it 1 million times in the last time that we got together, I've been putting our shows up that I've missed, that I haven't been able to be a part of because I've been sick, up on Spotify. So for those of you, or not just Spotify, but all the other platforms, for those of you who are wondering, where'd our episodes go? They're coming. And... so far, in every episode I've watched, he's mentioned Scrum at least once. So I'm just like, you know what? This is a bit like that IR35 thing where he's not going to shut up about it unless we have a show.
Well, you see, we've already done a show. We did a show on agility, or Agile, rather, which is Scrum, kind of. It's not the same thing, but we'll talk through that. A few months back, in fact, it was over a year ago now, with Mark Walsh, one of our guests, regular guests.
Gosh, we've been around forever.
Yeah, I don't think you were in that show. It was just me in that one, Josey. So you missed it. So anyway, we get an opportunity to. So let's start with a question for Josey. Josey, have you ever done Scrum properly? And in fact, does anybody ever do Scrum properly? Do you know enough about it to say that?
That's the thing. I do so much development solo that I've never had a Scrum thing. The majority of what I know about Scrum comes from everything that I've heard from other people, along with, developers who are like, well, in a Scrum environment, you have a Scrum Master, and you have these little sit downs to decide what projects you're working on, and they should be really short. But then I hear the horror stories side of things. So I hear from the developers who sit there going, okay, that took 2 hours. What the hell?
So yes, so Scrum is so let's give a high level of a Scrum. Scrum is a framework that adheres, or should really adhere, to the Agile manifesto. We talked about the Agile manifesto last time. I'm going to briefly read it out word for word, just so we have somewhere to start from and we can refer back to it, because this is key to actually running the Scrum framework properly. When I say properly, Scrum is extremely flexible as well, but it's flexible as long as you accept its values and the way that it's supposed to work. You can't just, to me, you couldn't have Scrum without the daily Scrum, in my eyes. And I feel like when you're working in a proper Scrum environment, the ceremonies that Scrum prescribes are extremely important as well. So let's read out the Agile manifesto to start off with. So, okay. Individuals and interactions over processes and tools. That's kind of a dig at things like Waterfall, where everything's a process. Everything is driven by the stage before it. Whereas Scrum Scrum has stages, but it's a circular thing. It feeds back into itself, and all of the stages kind of feed into each other within a very short iteration. Whereas a Waterfall project runs, let's say, for example, a project runs for 2 years. You'll have 3 months of requirement gathering, followed by 3 months of planning, followed by 3 months of design, followed by implementation, which might go round in circles with testing and development, but you won't actually have a product that you can deliver, or any kind of product at all, really, until the end of the process 2 years later. Whereas Scrum focuses on delivering in short iterations and saying, right, we've now got a prototype, we've now added something to the prototype, we've now added something different. And the main key difference is that it focuses on the value of the features, because software is never finished. And I've said this so many times, and I love the phrase. It's the Leonardo da Vinci's kind of paraphrase about art. Software is never finished, it is only abandoned. Because I agree with that. We never ever finish, and we're always going to be changing it, upgrading it, until at some point it becomes useless. Mm-hmm. And at that point, we abandon it and we go, right, we're going to rewrite it, or the product's no longer useful. And that's what Scrum focuses on. It focuses on the honest part of software, whereas Waterfall looks at something as a big, massive project with a final delivery date, which is unrealistic because things change. In 2 years' time or 1 year time, so many variables change that Scrum focuses on the change, that is the constant, Right. So that's the first Agile manifesto. The second one, or tenet of the manifesto rather, working software over comprehensive documentation. Again, another dig at kind of having so many documents that are output by each kind of waterfall driven stage. Customer collaboration over contract negotiation. This one's a bit up and down for me, so there has to be some real contract negotiation in place, for most customers, depending on what kind of software you're delivering, that has to exist somewhere. But customer collaboration, I think, is extremely important. If you cannot change based on what your customers want, you're going to be seen as obtuse. You're going to be seen as somebody who cannot adapt. Obtuse or obsolete? Both. You're going to be seen as somebody who doesn't want to change because you do it this way. Whereas with a Scrum... Adapt to change, my friends. If you're getting in development, just accept change happens. And accept the more it changes, the more it stays the same. And this leads into, well, I've almost said the last, there's only 4 points on the manifesto. Responding to change over following a plan. I.e., stop worrying about trying to deliver to that date in 2 months, in 2 years' time. Actually, deliver in small increments and deliver the most valuable features first. That's the ideal world, excuse me. But we don't live in an ideal world.
No, we don't. No.
So, what is your experience of Scrum then so far, Josey? What have you worked on as outside of a Scrum or in a Scrum, or have you never
No,
really experienced it?
that's the thing. I mean, I've done agile things, but I've never done Scrum. And it's Scrum is one of those things where I see in developer talks and developer conferences and things like that, Scrum does get talked about along with Agile. And of course, there is a debate of, is Agile really, like there's a whole pollination across opinions. But for the most part, everything I hear about Scrum, when implemented well, and that's the important part here, because I hear so many horror stories of it not being implemented well, or only being partially implemented or stunted in its implementation, or like I hear the horror stories. But when it's implemented well, it's a very driving force towards keeping a project going, period. Because one of the things that can happen in a project is people can just become fatigued by the project itself.
Right.
And Agile actually helps prevent fatigue on that.
It gives you... Right, so let's talk about before we go any further about talking about the pros and cons of Scrum, because there's lots of both. Let's talk about the process. The official definition of Scrum, or the ideal definition of Scrum, or rather the ideal ceremonies involved in Scrum. Let's talk about those.
Define ceremony, Chris.
Well, so a ceremony is something that you do as part of a process. So that immediately takes me straight to the first Agile manifesto of individuals and interactions over processes and tools. That doesn't mean we don't have processes and tools. That just means that we prefer and we value individuals and interactions between those individuals, including customers and other members of the team and other members of the business, over the processes and tools. If the processes and tools are getting in the way, get rid of them or change them. And that's the point. People focus on the ceremonies as something that is in the way sometimes. So let me explain the ceremonies. Officially, let's go with a hypothetical Scrum. A sprint of 2 weeks. So a sprint is a period of time where you start and you end that iteration. By the end of the iteration, you should officially have some kind of working software or something to show. Now, I'm working in a team at the moment that I am training everybody on Scrum generally, and they come from a waterfall kind of background because of the customers that they work with. So I'm slowly introducing things to them as it becomes relevant. And the good thing about Scrum is that at the end of every iteration, you have something called a review and have something called a retrospective, where you can look at the process and you can figure out what needs to change. You can take feedback from members of the team and you can seek to improve it over the next sprint. So you've got a 2 week period where you deliver something, you look at the things that you've delivered, you have already assigned a value to those things, so you can also measure how much velocity we talk about that team has. So at the beginning of the process, so let's say we've just started out at the beginning of this 2 week process, we have something called a sprint planning meeting, and this is the bane of a developer's life, because this is, for a 2 week period, it's traditionally known to be a 4-hour meeting, and it's usually supposed to take place Monday morning between 9 or whatever and 12, and it's time boxed. All of these ceremonies are time boxed. So that 4 hours, you talk about the problems. If you're coming out of if it's a start sprint, then you're in a start-up mode, so you don't really have anything to talk about in terms of retrospectivity, but you do have something to talk about in terms of, these are the general requirements that we have, that we know. These are the things that we know we need to do. Let's start working on them. Let's plan how to work on them. And basically, you take the things called product backlog items, which are just tasks that need to be performed, or user stories if you're working with user stories and customers that understand them and want to work in that way. You take them and then you split them up into tasks and estimate how long them tasks are going to take, and you talk as a team, as a development team, about what is going to be, what it takes to fulfill that requirement. If you don't know what it takes to fulfill that requirement, then you do things called spikes, which you go off and figure things out and then feed back to the team. If you do know, then you're able to estimate as best you can. Over time, over a number of sprints, you as a team become better at estimating as well, because you refine the process, you refine how you create tickets and how you put things down. It's always difficult defining what a PBI is versus what a task is versus what, usually you know what a bug is, but other than that, you don't know what a feature or an epic is and things like that. And all of those things are all malleable. We started off in this team by the product owner, which I haven't got into the roles yet. We started off with the product owner going away and creating all of the epics and all of the features and then starting to create all the PBIs. And it's like, it didn't work because he didn't know enough he knows about the architecture of the system. He doesn't know enough about the business requirements and anywhere near enough about the code and the amount of change that needs to happen in the code. So it was wrong. So basically within 2 or 3 sprints, we actually scrapped that idea and we just went down to, right, let's just start a little bit more granular and let's look at creating essentially requirements. Right, we need a error logger, we need to handle the view models, we need to handle this, all of these individual things that the team knows about. The database needs to change in this way, all kinds of different things within a software development cycle. And then we split them down into tasks and allocate them to different people. So that's what the sprint planning's for. It's to essentially get your ducks in a row for the next 2 weeks or 4 weeks if it's a 4-week sprint, or God forbid you do longer sprints than 4 weeks. It's madness. Sorry if you can hear that noise outside. There's someone decided to pull up and play music straight outside. But anyway, so that's the first ceremony. The second ceremony that comes along is the daily scrum, also known as a stand-up in some circles. Doesn't really matter what you call it. What's important is that it is a 15-minute meeting. Say you've got 5 members of your team, 15-minute, maybe a bit longer if you've got more members of your team. But essentially, what have I done yesterday? What am I doing today? What am I blocked by? And what the key thing is what you're blocked by. What are your impediments? It's not about updating people. It's not about updating the product owner. It's not about updating the other members of the team, what you've done necessarily. It's about what am I blocked by to get the work done that needs to be done by the end of this sprint. It's also worth noting as well in the sprint planning meeting that we talk about, we set a high-level goal for the sprint. We say that this is what we want to achieve by the end of the sprint. We want a working prototype. We want 3 forms done for the website, or whatever it is. You define what it is, and then you work backwards. And then you figure, or you might even work on the task first and then go, actually, this looks like the actual goal of this sprint is actually about exception logging or something like that. It could be anything, but everybody works together as a cross-functional team to get to that goal. So the daily scrum is about aligning yourself with the rest of the development team, and that's it. It's not an update meeting, and that's a key thing because that often happens. It often changes. It's not a detail-driven meeting either. You don't talk about low-level bits of information that you need to know. You don't say, the interface that I've been working on is wrong and I need to change it, and that's going to affect you, Jeff, and that's going to affect you, Sarah. It's not about that. It's about making sure that you can communicate with each other very briefly and quickly and take anything more detailed offline, and don't waste anybody else's time, because time is important and expensive.
Time is money.
It is. I realise I'm doing most of the talking here, but hopefully you don't mind that, Josey.
No, the entire purpose here is a learning lesson. I mean, I basically led you through several episodes before. I mean, I see nothing wrong with this. Besides, in the end, you still need to finish defining ceremonies. I
do. So that's the second ceremony. There's 2 more ceremonies that occur within a sprint, within Scrum, and they're the only ceremonies that are recognised. I've already mentioned them, and they come at the end of the sprint, or one. Yes, they both come at the end of the sprint traditionally, but the team that I'm working in now wanted to do the planning, the retrospective, and the review all in one day, and it was just tiring. And I warned them. I warned them that it was going to be a long,
I think that would mentally
day.
Drain you.
It did, and we didn't get anywhere near what we needed done. So the sprint and the sprint review is about showing what you've completed. showing the product owner, showing the rest of the team what you've completed and how it kind of works. Now, one of the key things there is making sure that you don't show work that isn't finished yet. It's important to show work that affects other people, I suppose, but that isn't finished is the key thing, and defining that is the hard thing. Defining, and you might have heard the term, the definition of done. Defining the definition of done is one of the most difficult things in Scrum I've found. Actually saying that
I think it's one of the most difficult things. I think it's one of the most difficult things, period, and when it comes to any kind of development.
Yeah.
I mean, even with the stuff that I do, which in some cases could be an incredibly simple website, is it done? Is it done? And there's always something more you can do to improve, always. But there has to be a good enough, as the way I see it.
That's the key thing. It's not good enough. What it is the definition of done is about defining, during sprint planning usually, and agreeing across the team that this is the acceptance criteria for this ticket. We appreciate that exception handling has more work to do on it, but the actual definition of done is we need to create a few classes, or we need to expose those classes to the upper layers, or whatever you want to do. Then there's tons of other things that need to be done on it, but the definition of done is key to being able to, one, estimate things in terms of effort. So effort isn't about hours. Effort is about, you might use story points, you might use T-shirt sizes, you might use for Fibonacci numbers. It could be anything. It has to be. The key thing about that in the planning is it has to be unemotional. There has to not be an emotional attachment to how much time something is going to take. It's about relative effort versus a benchmark, or versus what you've done in the past. So what I tend to do is I show people all of the points that we allocated to previous tickets that have been completed. If we need to alter those points a little bit, we might do, but generally we'll look at them and go, right, so you're saying that this item we're talking about is more work than that last one? Oh, no, it isn't. So then let's bring it down a bit. Is it more work than this other one, or is it less work?
When you get a baseline, you have a lot of good things you can compare to. Now, I'm going to jump in real quick because we got a question from the chat, which I think is a very viable one. I know what you're talking about, but Wiltrack would like to know the product owner.
Yes.
It's a role within the dev team, not the customer, right? I keep getting confused with those role designations.
I would like to defer that until a little bit later, because we'll get onto that in a minute. I want to finish the ceremonies off first, because we're still not quite there.
Okay.
So I will answer that, because that's one of the things we have to talk about to define Scrum.
You have to understand the roles that are available. Yeah.
So the review, the review is about showing your work. It's about discussing what you've done and grooming the backlog at a high level to make sure that the backlog is in a position that the sprint planning meeting can go smoothly. I've had very recently, in fact, quite a few planning meetings that have gone completely awry because nobody's been grooming the backlog properly. And I'm training people to slowly do that. It's the responsibility of the entire team to do that. The product owner's responsibility in that particular respect is prioritizing things, and I'll tell you why later on. So the last ceremony involved in Scrum comes straight after it's immediately after. I mean, the Scrum review, couple of hours, 2 hours maybe for a 2-week sprint at the most, and the sprint retrospective, 1.5 to 2 hours for a 2-week sprint. This is about looking at the processes, looking at the tools, looking at things like the build process, looking at the environments that you're working in, looking at the interactions between people, figuring out if the migration that we've moved from SVN to Git, or we've moved from we've moved from Jenkins to Azure DevOps, or we've moved into AWS Elasticsearch or something recently. Are they working? Was it a good decision? Do we need to go back on that decision? And going back on things is fine, as long as we understand that change is the only constant, and it will always change. And it's not a problem. Admitting defeat on something, don't keep bashing away at something just because it's the way you used to do things, or you've already made that decision, so we must have a result. If your spikes have gone wrong, then discard them. That's the key thing there.
Well, yeah, no, I'll get into that later. But yeah, I know what you mean by that.
Each of those ceremonies are, we'll now get into roles. So we'll answer Volstrat's question very shortly, but each of the ceremonies are attended by different members of the Scrum team. The Scrum team only recognises three roles. Nothing else matters to Scrum. And I mean nothing else matters to Scrum, as Metallica would say. First of all, the product owner role. Secondly, the Scrum Master role. And thirdly, a development team member. Now, bearing in mind that the development team member, one of the development team members, may be a Scrum Master. They may also be the product owner, but they don't have to be. The product owner, so let's start with that, and let's actually answer Volstrat's question. So let's read out his question again, just to...
The product owner is a role within the dev team, not the customer, right? I keep getting confused with those role designations.
Right. So the product owner, yes, they are a member of the Scrum team. The product owner traditionally is somebody who liaises between the dev team and the business or the customer, depending on who you face. Basically, the business can be a customer as well, if you're writing internal line of business software, for example.
Would you state then that it's more likely that in Scrum, the product owner is the liaison with the stakeholders?
Yes,
in project management.
Stakeholders is the exact right word, yes.
Because stakeholders in the end tend to be sometimes like the higher ups in management, but it can also be the customer. But, you know, it depends entirely upon the types of projects you're working on too.
It does. Now, the product owner also acts as a buffer between the development team and the business. One of the worst things that can happen in Scrum is the business, somebody who is not involved in the day-to-day operations of the Scrum team, comes in, somebody from the business or the customer comes in and goes, no, I want this to change in the middle of a Scrum. Change is good, but change generally should only happen outside the Scrum, and it should be in the backlog. Now, if we've agreed to do something in a Scrum as part of the sprint planning, we should know enough about it to be able to make decisions and actually get it down, you know, actually get the work done and have a finished product or a workable feature of some description. The product owner's job is almost not just a buffer, but almost a guard for the development team as well. I don't like looking at it that way though, because I'm not keen on this whole... Right, so the development team will be doing work, but they usually, in an ideal world, they would speak to the product owner and get answers for the questions they have. But that isn't an ideal world and isn't always practical. So the development team are perfectly fine with asking questions to someone in the finance department, or even speaking to the customer directly themselves if they want, as long as all of that stuff is agreed by the product owner. The product owner's main responsibility is to prioritize the backlog, prioritize the work that is going to get done in the next sprint, really. And they can only do that with the feedback from the customer and also feedback from the development team. So they can't dictate in any way, shape or form. And it's also worth noting as well that during the sprint planning, it's the developers that estimate things. You never, if a product owner or a customer is telling you how long things should take, or in fact how to do something, then something is going drastically wrong, because the product owner's job is to, guard really the development team as best they can, but also make sure that the most valuable features are being worked on first. And that is the key difference between Scrum and Waterfall. We deliver, in a Scrum team, you deliver based on the value that feature is providing the stakeholders. And to us, with our little dark bedrooms that we work in and little dark cubicles in the corner of the room, we want to be focused on I'm not saying it's all hard work, but we want to be focused on the difficult task of programming, which, you know, you can argue it's not difficult if you've done it a long time, but it's still... we need to write a lot of code to get things done a lot of the time, and a lot of it's boring, a lot of it's interesting. It depends on how you look at it and but the key thing it
depends on what you find fascinating.
Yeah, really. The thing I thrive on is delivering that value ticking that box and going, that ticket is done. What we agreed to do is finished. I've checked it in. I've committed it to master or main or the develop branch or whatever workflow you're working in. Doesn't really matter. It's been pushed and shared with everybody, and it's in there, and it works. And I've got my tests and everything else.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the product owner. Hopefully that answered Volstrat's question.
Clarifies. It says, so the product owner is the dev team stakeholder interface. Got it.
Yeah, essentially. I mean, remember that a product owner can be a developer as well, but that product owner must be able to put different hats on, because a developer will make different decisions from somebody who is business focused as well. So the product owner serves the business. The good way to look at this is the product owner serves the business. That's the way that they... that is their sole responsibility. They do guard the dev team from distractions, but they serve the business. The development team, so let's talk about the development team members before we get onto the really complicated
Scrum Master.
The often misunderstood Scrum Master. So the development team are they are the doers. They are generally, they should be cross-functional, i.e., one of the worst things you can do in a Scrum team, because you work in these small 2-week increments, is say, you're the database guy, you're the front-end guy, you're the back-end guy. Really, everybody should really be a full-stack developer that can deal with almost anything. And we should be sharing knowledge constantly as part of the Scrum, the stand-up, the Scrum meetings, the stand-ups, the retrospectives and everything else, all of the ceremonies. All of that knowledge should be shared. Quite often in Scrum processes, mentor junior programmers to hand things over to them, to get them used to new technologies, to get them used to how to work with new patterns and ideas, and teach them how to do test-driven development, that kind of thing. And that feeds into Scrum quite well, because we don't have to do paired programming or anything like that to do that, but we can share knowledge. And the development team essentially do things. They serve the product owner. So you see where this is going. The development team serve the product owner serves the business. So really, by proxy, determinally, that's the wrong word, determinally, the development team serve the business via the proxy of the product owner, who is largely responsible for the value that is being delivered by the development team. Okay?
I find it fascinating that you describe it that way, because, one of the things that I thought about Scrum was that it was designed to prevent siloing.
Well, that's the thing, is we don't silo, because remember, people over process. So when siloing, the whole point is that we are cross-functional. We are not siloing one developer into... I've just said... did you hear the other way around?
No. It's the fact that the silos that I see in my brain tend to be like the dev team is completely segregated from everybody else, period. Like, there is something to be said, because I have seen teams where you have people who are very database focused, or I've seen teams that are very, front end, and they're not all full stack, because I'm sorry, we don't live in a perfect world. And while it would be absolutely fabulous to be able to constantly share knowledge, things still need to get done, which means if you are in a point where you have to do something for the business and the business requires a particular thing, you may pass it on to someone who is the most skilled on your team for that particular area.
That exact thing happens. So let me give you an example of a ticket, right? So we're working on a product backlog item. That backlog item is, let's take this exception handling thing I was just talking about. That just happens to be a thing in my mind, because that's what I'm working on at the moment is global exception handling for...
I'll tell you what, exception handling is a work of art in itself.
I love it.
Really
I love it, because you really do thoroughly need to understand the language that you're working in to properly do exception handling. But anyway,
not just that, but what you're building as well.
Yes. And the requirements of both ends. Anyway, so, right, we've got this ticket that is... do exception handling, right? We've agreed the definition of done. We agreed that it needs to do this, and this. we split things out into tasks. Once we've agreed and kind of said we think this is a 12 or a 20 story points, we've give it this arbitrary value, this relative value. We then go, right, let's actually split this down into tasks and talk about it during the sprint planning. We end up with 6 different tasks, and we've allocated each of those tasks to individuals based on either what they're best at, what they've currently been working on, what they've got time to do, or it could be someone's over provisioned, so Jeff, can you take this ticket off somebody else? Are you comfortable doing that? Yes, but I'll need to speak to you about it. That's fine, let's do it. So yes, they might be siloed from the rest of the business, but can you imagine any development team being even remotely productive if they were open to everyone in the finance and HR department coming to speak to them every 5 minutes?
No, to be perfectly blunt, we all get annoyed by people bugging us anyway.
It's
when
not
we're
the
in the middle
annoying
of a thing.
It's the productivity thing. Sorry, I have to be clear. I don't mind speaking to people, but if you want me to do my job and you want me to be able to deliver something, I need to be able to focus on it.
Back off! I've got garlic. It's the bean counters.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is it's not about siloing the team necessarily, because they are free to go and speak to people, but they have to speak to people in order to facilitate the completion of their work. And we all do that. I mean, I'm not saying they can't go and speak to someone at the water cooler and that kind of thing, but it's about delivering the things that we've agreed to deliver within that sprint, right? And yes, we have to, I'm sorry, but I don't care who you are, you have to take some responsibility, whether you're a junior developer or a senior developer or a product manager or something. It doesn't really matter. You have to take responsibility in your job. And if you're letting people come and speak to you all the time, and you're open to that, you must have time for that. If you don't have time for that, then you have to put some guards up. And I'm not talking about being horrible to people. I'm just talking about just explain to them. I'm sorry.
Radiation stickers, do not cross, yellow tape.
I'll give you another example.
Continue.
Today at 1 o'clock, I booked in a mentoring session with somebody else on my development team. One of the juniors, I booked in a mentoring session. At about 10 o'clock, I knew that I was behind and I had 16 hours worth of work left to do. Luckily, I can do my tickets pretty quickly. But these are tickets that I've agreed to do and I've taken on myself. In order to get them done, I said to him, this mentoring that we were going to do, I'm going to have to put it back. I'm sorry, I haven't got time to do it. Are you okay with that? Are you good with your tickets? Because I'm also acting as a Scrum Master, which we haven't got onto yet as well. So he said, yes, that's fine. Actually, something else has come up with another project anyway within the same business, because I work on one project because I'm a contractor. They work on loads of different projects. They get pulled from pillar to post all the time. I'm lucky in a sense, I suppose, but that's how I work, so that's how it works.
Yeah, but hearing that just scares me, considering so much. Yeah, so but anyway.
Ideally, their scrum, that business's scrum should really be a scrum for all of the projects, that kind of, and towards the product, the building the product, but it isn't, and it doesn't really matter. But beside the point, it is like that. And that is an example of me saying to somebody, I'm sorry, I can't help you do your job because my job is suffering, if you know what I mean, and do it in an eloquent way. It's not horrible. It's negotiating, and we all do it all the time. So, development team. Is that the development team covered? Are you happy with that definition of them? They are a cross-functional team of people that do things and complete the sprint goal. What?
Yes, Chris, I agree with this definition.
Okay. Hello, Poker Weasbell. Poker's Weeble. There you are. That's it.
Or Weeble, depending upon.
Okay, right, so the last definition we're going to talk about is, or the last role, bearing in mind that there's these 3 roles,
Scrum Master.
Is the Scrum Master. Now, you tell me what you think a Scrum Master is, Josey. I'll let you talk for a little bit.
My opinion on it is, besides what you said being misunderstood, it's their job to make certain that these ceremonies are maintained at what they're supposed to be.
Not too far off, but too solid a definition.
So, my! I'm so sorry.
Ideally, a Scrum Master is an evangelist for the Scrum framework. An evangelist being the key thing, but also they are they don't necessarily make people go to the ceremonies. They facilitate people. If someone can't make the ceremony, it's not the end of the world, put it that way. Some people have days off, believe it or not. Some people can't make the ceremony on that day because they've got another meeting. That's fine, as long as it doesn't happen too often. But what a Scrum Master does is they unblock people. So remember when I talked about the product owner serving the business and the development team serving the product owner? Who do you think the Scrum Master serves? Do you think they serve anybody? Or do you think other people serve them? Scrum Master.
I think in all honesty, they serve the project.
Oh, good. Not bad. Nearly. They are a servant leader. Officially, that is the term used to describe a Scrum Master. So they serve the product owner and they serve the development team by leading them through the Scrum process. Now,
let me just go right out and say, if you're a leader, you're a good follower at the same time. That's all I'm going to say. Because in the end, all leaders are the people supporting the people who they're leading. And anyone who tries to not do that, you ain't a bloody leader.
So it's
Fight me.
It's not about rigidly sticking. Like as a Scrum Master, it's not about rigidly sticking to the ceremonies. It's not about rigidly making sure that everybody's updating tickets and things like that. It's dealing with what you dealt with, because at the end of the day, you can't control everybody, and that's not how it is. If you try to do that as a Scrum Master, you're doing your job wrong.
Seeing that there's something like quote unquote fixed in something that is so agile, it's so developed to change.
Yes, and it does change. So one thing that's been happening in the Scrum that I'm working in at the moment is that the stand-ups have been getting slightly longer every day. Tiny bit longer. A couple of minutes here and there. Things have been slipping a little bit. People are talking about more things in the stand-ups than they should do. So tomorrow, which is our retrospective day, we're at the end of our sprint. In the retrospective, I will bring that up as the Scrum Master. And I will say to them, we need to be more rigid about this because we're wasting other people's time. When me and Jeff talk about this interface being wrong and go into the detail about it and start asking questions to each other, that is an indicator for us to say, stop, take this offline because we're wasting Sarah and Francis's time, whoever else is on the team, because they don't need to know the detail that we need to know. They will know that detail if they ever need to. We can pass that information on to them, and the review is that moment where we can share that information with them, and if they are so inclined, they can get involved in that in the next, if they've got time and tickets are allocated to them, they can get involved in that and start working on that part of the software. Or whatever. So it's about facilitating other people and reminding people of what it's about and keeping that hat on and making sure that you're not stepping outside of the lines too often, or things aren't getting out of control. It's facilitating the usage of the tools. It's helping people unblock each other. It's explaining that, right, we need to take that offline, from the stand-ups. And so, Sarah, you need to speak to Jeff. Go off and speak to them after the stand-up. It's not about telling them they have to do it. It's saying, right, so that's blocking you, isn't it? And explaining that you're blocked by this other person, so a 5-minute conversation might unblock them. You might need more time. It might move into the next sprint. It's not the end of the world. We're still making progress. We might have a completely failed sprint, but let's focus on what we did well and also what we did wrong and what we need to improve to make sure we don't do that wrong again. It's a positive mental attitude that you need to maintain. It's not. They're essentially a Scrum trainer, and they're an ongoing Scrum trainer that is a member of the team constantly. They pretty much attend everything. They don't have to. For Scrum Masters, like quite often, big companies, big enterprise companies, they will have a Scrum Master that will jump between lots of different teams, and that will be their job. But
there's even certifications for Scrum Masters.
Don't get me started on Scrum and Agile certifications.
Yeah, but that's the thing. I have also realized we're at a point where we need to start wrapping up. So Here's my thinking. In this particular show, we have talked about the Agile manifesto. We have discussed a basic bit of Scrum. We've laid the foundation through understanding what ceremonies are and some roles. We've talked a little bit about some of the things that can occur. How about if next week we continue with all of the notes that we currently have?
Yeah, and we'll talk about the pros, the cons, the benefits, the drawbacks, maybe the differences between things like Waterfall and Lean, potentially. I haven't got as much experience with Lean. It comes from kind of the car manufacturing world, but it's kind of...
Or Scrum to come.
Say that again?
I'm sorry, Voltcrat just said more Scrum to come. Nice. I'm like, that is such our title for next week. Thank you. You have no idea how long Chris and I will sit and think of titles for shows. Oh, gosh.
So yeah, I think we've defined. I think I've actually got to a pretty good point there because we've said
it's a good place to stop.
Yeah. So I'm sorry we didn't talk about more because it's been a crisp cast today, hasn't it?
Well, see, here's the thing. I think a big part of any discussion in Scrum, you need to understand what those people are talking about. Because I have seen people discuss things differently. And seeing and hearing what you see it as means I understand what you're talking about. I don't experience Scrum because of all of the fact that I do 99% solo work. So, in my particular case, it's sort of a... where is it at in today's day and age? Because Scrum's been around for a while.
Oh, yeah.
Agile development's been around for a while.
20 years. Or longer, to be fair. 20 years ago, they actually created the manifesto, Agile manifesto. But it was around before that. It just wasn't kind of officialized.
Yeah. So here's what we'll do. We will continue with more Scrum to come next week. Also, by the way, if you have any horror stories or really cool success stories with Scrum, get in touch with us through Twitter at DNI Stream or through our contact page. But let us move into what we do before we end the show. We do something called the BYOM. This is our chance to bring our manual to you. This is where we get to share things that we have learned that we think might be interesting or might be kind of cool or just anything. And we do try to stick to development-based topics, but that's not always the thing that we discuss as something that we've learned. So, that's something to keep in mind. Chris, do you have something this week?
Yeah, I mean, I've learned actually a fair bit this week, and I actually learned something from somebody that I was training about a framework that I've used for years called Mock. It's a mocking framework for unit testing. And this isn't what I was going to talk about. I'm going to talk about C#9 being brilliant. But it was interesting. That
oh my God, I remember when C# came out.
I remember, I trained somebody on basically how to use this, and then 2 weeks later they come back at me and say, I've done this test, pushed it, and I looked at it and I said, why have you done that? That looks mad. That's crazy. There's some closures going on there, etc. Didn't say it like that, but that's what I thought. And then I looked at it a bit more detail and I went, oh, there's something I've learned there. And it's nice to see me teaching somebody, them using a tool that I know pretty damn well in a very different way to me and learning from them, And it doesn't happen that often to me these days because I'm used to the tools that I use, But it's really cool that happened. But anyway, my BYOM is C#9 because it looks brilliant, as do all new C# releases because I am a C# fanboy. But two features in particular in C#9, because .NET 5 got released yesterday, I think. .NET 5, the newest version of .NET Core. It's not called .NET Core, it's called .NET now because they're going unified. The two new features, one are headless programs, so you can write a program without a class, without creating a main method, without creating the program class. I don't know if you've ever written anything in C#, but it's you have to. Normally, you start a new program and you see new public class program with a main method, and that main method get called, and that's. But it probably does that in the background somewhere. But you now don't need to do that to create new programs in C#9. And the other cool thing was they brought in a new reference type that acts like value types. I'm not going to explain what reference and value types are because we're too deep in the conversation, deep into
this is what gets you excited, though.
It does.
Yes.
But they've introduced a new type called a record type, and I haven't fully investigated it yet. But this looks like it's going to drastically reduce the amount of boilerplate code I have to write for POCO objects. So POCO objects are plain old CLR objects, or POJO, plain old Java objects if you're in the Java world. And all they do is really hold data. We pass them around, and we pass them in and out of methods, and you mainly use them for, we use them for it when we're designing APIs, RESTful APIs, or even any old school WCF APIs or anything like that. Just basically data structures that hold information. But these new record types look like they're basically one-liners, and they just define the name and then the type and the property names, and it looks like that's going to replace so much code for me, and it's going to make things a lot easier. I might even be able to have one class with all of my API definitions in, and it makes sense, which might be useful. So I'm looking forward to playing with them. That's what I've learned. So what about you, Josey? I'll let you talk for 55 minutes.
It depends on the topic with us as to who ends up with the bigger mouth. It's the nature of how this show works. It's also why I love chatting with you, Chris. In my particular case, the past week, I have been spending a lot of time nailing down RFPs. For those who are unfamiliar with the concept, an RFP is a request for proposal. It's where you present to a vendor or a potential vendor what it is you're looking to accomplish, what it is you're looking to get, and they then turn around and say, here's what we can offer based on either our services, our skill sets, or what have you. And in this particular case, I'm doing a bunch of RFPs based on my monitoring solution, because I have so many different types of monitoring that is done, and I want to be able to visually see and work with the different sources in one environment. And I have found out that through my building my RFPs, every time I talk to someone about what it is I'm trying to find or et cetera, every single one of them goes, that's a SaaS product that doesn't exist yet. And I find myself going, isn't that just the case with every single thing that we as developers tend to do? We tend to we want things a very particular way, and then we go out looking for it. We don't find it, and then we sit there and we go, maybe that's my ticket to millionaire Tesla row or something like that.
That's why there are so many different versions of the same thing out there doing slightly different things.
Yes.
There's that XKCD comic, I can't remember what it was called now, but it was basically there was about specifications, wasn't it? Let's create specification version 3 because 2.0 doesn't do what 1.0 used to do, and 2.0 is slightly old now, or let's create another one.
Oh my god, yes.
We hate specifications, but let's create a specification to solve all specifications. I don't know.
Or my favorite thing is, in the process of doing this, I have companies trying to oversell me. I'm like, that is not what I'm asking for. I have a list of specific things that I need accomplished. I have a list of things that would be really kind of nice to have, but are not a requirement. But then they're like, but then you can do all of this other stuff. And I'm just like, bugger off. No. You're going outside my scope here. You're wasting my time. And Chris has just linked the XKCD thing. I'll be sure to include it in our show notes as well for those who catch up with that in the future.
I should be better at that because I refer to that SK. That's one of the few XKCD ones that I refer to every now and again, but I should be better remembering. It's about standards, not specifications.
It doesn't matter. It all kind of links up, as the case may be. But yes, so that was our BYOM, and we're now at the end of our show. Thank you to all of you in Twitch chat who have joined us live and jumped in with thoughts, questions, and welcome to anyone who is new. And for everyone who's listening into the podcast in the future, hi, please come see us live. Yes, we haven't been around on the podcast for a while, but we are still here. Anyway, yes, you can visit our website on www.dnistream.live, where we have links to all of our podcast channels and our things like Spotify, which I've actually listened to us on Spotify. We're a bit quiet on Spotify, actually. Probably a bit quiet everywhere, so maybe I need to do something about that in the post-editing. Sounds a bit
Yeah, I'll have a look at that. So maybe this particular episode will be louder than the rest of them. So sorry about that, everybody. Sorry if it suddenly comes on and you listen to it in bed or something. I don't know what you're doing, listen to us in bed, but yes. So our Discord link is on there as well, and you can contact us on the website for any reason whatsoever if you've got any comments, queries, suggestions of topics, or you want to be a guest on the show. Please do get in touch. And lastly, do not forget to follow our Twitch thing. That way, I'll point the right direction one day. Down over there.
She just said, don't follow us on Twitch.
Did I just say don't follow us on Twitch? Don't.
That's what it
Useless.
We're so successful at this whole marketing thing.
Self-promotion. It's self-demotion. That's what it is.
Oh my gosh. It
As
really is with
Volstrat
us.
just said, turn it up to 11. Turn the podcast up to 11. So I'll make sure that it's really badly compressed and you can't understand us and we sound like aliens.
Oh my gosh, no. And do keep in mind, we do have more episodes coming out from the past couple months that haven't yet hit on YouTube and on the Spotify, Google Play, Apple Store, blah, 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 blah. So, yeah. Until then, we hope to see you all next week where we're going to have more Scrum to come. Yay! At 7 p.m. GMT UK time, basically, on twitch.tv/DNI stream. All that's left to do is say bye-bye. So bye-bye, Chris.
Goodbye, Josey. Goodbye,
and
everybody.
Bye, everyone.